Hello, everyone. This is DCE again, and thank you very much for tuning in to me again. Whether you're listening on Spreaker or YouTube, I thank you so much. So I just want to talk a little bit about that HBO series, Chernobyl. All right, now Chernobyl, it was only 5 episodes on HBO. But I must say it was a very good show, and we know that it's based on an actual event. The devastating Chernobyl disaster that took place April 26, 1986. And some of you probably were in elementary school, middle school, or high school like I was. I was in elementary school. I remember it. Okay. And we know that during that time, the USSR, the Soviet Union, was in full effect. This was during the Cold War, and I believe Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States. But anyways, I'm not going to get into episode by episode review of Chernobyl, okay? If you hadn't seen it, you should watch it. If you are a parent and if you have children who are mature enough that you think could handle watching a show like this, especially if they're school-age children, like middle school, high school, I would definitely encourage them to watch it, okay? Well, you watch it with them and you talk to them about it. Now, there were 3 stars, 3 people in the movie I'm familiar with, 3 actors and actresses. Jared Harris, he played the lead scientist, and I'm going to butcher his name. The person's name was Legosov. Please forgive me, y'all, but I tried my best, okay? He was the lead outside scientist that the government called on to help put an end to the meltdown, Jared Harris. And he also, I remember he was in that show that was on AMC. Oh gosh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Good show. I love it. The Terror. That's the name of it. The Terror. He was in season 1 of The Terror. Okay. Also, Stellan Skarsgård, he played a government official named Boris Sherbina. I messed that up. Stellan Skarsgård, he was in Thor, and he's, very well-known European actor in a lot of different little series from the BBC and whatnot. Anyways, and the last actress I recognized was Emily Watson. And her character, if you watch the 5th episode and the very end, like the post credits and whatnot, they explain Emily Watson's character, how she wasn't actually portraying one real person, but her character was, I guess you could say, an amalgamation of the many different scientists that worked with Legosov with trying to end the meltdown. Okay, so anyways, the first episode, I do it like this. The first episode started off showing a somewhat of a reenactment of Legosov, or Jared Harris, his final days in his apartment or flat, and he had a cat, and it was obvious that he was being watched and monitored, Legosov, and it showed him committing suicide. He hung himself. Okay, now like I said, he was the lead scientist. He was brought on by the government to help end the nuclear meltdown at Chernobyl. Okay, or, end it as best as they could and try to mitigate the fallout, I guess. But anyways, Um, the last episode showed this scientist Legasov testifying at a trial of the three people who were being, I guess you could say, who were being held accountable by the government for what happened with that Chernobyl. Now, at the end, towards the very end of the trial, Legasov decided that yes, he was told by the government officials he was straight up told by government officials, there are certain things you better say and there are the things you better not say. And he decided that he would say the things that the government did not want him to say, which was the truth. And if I'm wrong, you can correct me in the comments, but I do believe he said that yes, what happened was definitely the result of human error by the plant. I guess he was the plant manager or something. I can't remember the man's name, but if you watch it, he was the guy who was actually in the plant. He was like the foreman or whatever. He was a nasty MFer. He was a very nasty MFer. But anyways, and what he was forcing the workers to do, but also Legasov also said that the fault is bigger than the workers that were there and the supervisors, because what happened was that it wasn't a nuclear power plant that they created. It ended up being a nuclear bomb because they decided that the vital materials that were needed to make the plant safe was not used, that they ended up substituting that vital material for something that was a whole lot cheaper. And that's what caused the plant to basically turn into a bomb. Because when they hit the button, when the workers hit the button, when things were going wrong during the test run, the button was supposed to stop, just shut everything down. It didn't. It just caused a chain reaction. And that's basically what he said, that the people, the government, because we talk about during that time, we know what type of government the USSR was, or the Soviet Union was at that time. They decided we are going, instead of paying what needed to be paid to have this thing constructed and operate safely, we're going to pay the cheaper amount for these substitute materials. And we all see what happened in the end. Thousands and thousands of people were displaced, suffered, and died. Okay, so in the end, in that very last episode, after Legasov made that revelation at the trial, they showed him talking to that same high-ranking government official, which, here in America, especially in the 60s and 70s, people used to call them spooks. But he was telling him basically in no uncertain terms, look, this is what's going to happen to you. We're not going to kill you, but you better not communicate with any of these scientists that worked with you. You are no longer associated with this Chernobyl project. You don't speak to any of these scientists. You don't speak to these government officials. You stay in your house. You keep your mouth shut. You no longer exist. And he was basically putting him on notice. We own you now. We told you there were things you needed to say and things you better not say. You decided to go the other way. So you're sentenced to a life of solitude. That's basically what they did to him. And that explains why he ended up committing suicide. Okay. Now, from episode 1 all the way through episode 4, it was a very good series. like I said, I was in elementary school when this event with Chernobyl happened, and throughout school and of course college. I learned about Chernobyl, this devastating event, which still has some effects on that part of what is it, Ukraine? I might be mistaken, but that part of Europe today, and those children who were born decades later. But besides the science of it all, which I found absolutely fascinating, and I'm not a science person at all, there are other things that I found fascinating about this too, about this series, and it was the interaction, the government and the people. It's the government, the people, and the protection of the state in controlling the narrative. Okay. And when it all happened, according to the series, when it first occurred, there were people within the government, within the lower level of the government all the way up, who at first they tried their best to put a lid on the situation, in terms of they don't want what happened to get out to the surrounding countries in Europe. But of course, because the explosion was so devastating, they really couldn't hide that from the neighboring European countries, especially from the satellites that were in space that could pick up what happened. And of course, the news spread. And if I'm not mistaken, at one point they were some type, I guess, I don't want to know. Well, I think there might have been like some type of council of elders, or town council or whatever, meeting, a bunch of men. And one of the older men, he was describing about, you want to control the message. You don't let people in. You don't let people out. You don't let anyone in town. You don't let people out of town. They shut down the telephone service. And of course, this was before, cell phones and the internet. Basically, they locked the place down in an effort to try to keep people from, getting word out. And that was crazy. That was crazy. And then later on in the series, I think an episode later, when the word got out, because of the toxic plumes were going into other countries outside of the control of the Soviet Union, they started to evacuate people from the town. That same old man, he was one of the first people on the bus to be evacuated. But also, I think an important message, besides people ignoring the science, like I stated before, like with Hot Zone, people ignoring the science that's in front of their face, and ignoring experts, even though we know all experts aren't necessarily experts, because all experts don't know what they're talking about. But apparently when this occurred, you had Legasov and a team of a whole lot of experts who were basically saying the same thing, but they were being ignored. Okay, I'm coming back with part 2.